lost but not destroyed. You know exactly what I'm talking about. That weight in your chest that shows up when you're alone with your thoughts. That question that haunts you. What am I doing all this for? You look it in the eye every time you stop long enough, and that's why you don't stop anymore. You keep yourself busy, distracted, in constant motion. Because if you stop, if you really stop, that question catches up with you, and you don't have an answer. Your life looks good from the outside. You know it looks good. You have the things you're supposed to have. You did what you were supposed to do. You got where you were supposed to get. And yet, something doesn't fit. Something's missing. Or worse, something's extra. A constant feeling that you're performing, that you're following a script you never wrote. That the person you are during the day isn't the person you know on the inside. And that gap between who you pretend to be and who you really are gets bigger every day, heavier, more unbearable. There was a time when you had answers, when you knew what you wanted, when life had a clear direction, or at least you believed it did. But that time feels like another life, like it happened to someone else. Now there are only questions. Questions you're afraid to ask out loud, because admitting them means admitting that maybe you've been wrong. That maybe the path you've walked for years isn't taking you where you thought. That maybe this entire careful construction of successful adult life is built on foundations you never questioned. And questioning now, after so much invested, after so much sacrificed, feels like betrayal. To yourself, to those who depend on you, to everything you promised you would be. But you can't keep going like this. You know it. Because the emptiness isn't getting smaller with time. It's getting bigger, louder, more impossible to ignore. And the strategies you use to silence it don't work anymore. The work that used to fulfill you now only exhausts you. The achievements that used to excite you now feel empty before you even reach them. The things you bought to feel better only add more weight. And the people around you, even though you love them, even though they're your reason to keep going, can't fill the hole. Because the hole isn't about company, it's about meaning. And meaning doesn't come from outside. It never did. It never will. There's a story Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private notebooks. He was emperor, the most powerful man in the world. And he wrote something only someone completely lost would write. I wake up and don't recognize my own life. I have everything and I have nothing. I rule the world and I cannot rule myself. The Emperor of Rome, admitting in private what you admit when no one's listening, that you can have external success and internal collapse, that you can appear to have all the answers and be completely lost, that you can be at the top and feel like you're falling, and what's coming isn't what you expect. I'm not going to tell you everything's going to be okay. I'm not going to give you motivational phrases that sound nice for 5 minutes and then leave you exactly where you were. I'm not going to sell you the fantasy that if you just change your attitude, if you just think positive, if you just manifest better, the emptiness will disappear. Because that's a lie, a comfortable lie that keeps you trapped. And you've been trapped long enough. And I want to be clear about something before we continue. This isn't for everyone. If what you're looking for is to feel better without changing anything, close this now. If what you want is another dose of motivation that lasts until tomorrow and then leaves you exactly where you are, there are 1,000 places to get it. But if what you need, what you really need in your deepest core, is truth that works even when it hurts, then stay. Because what's coming isn't comfortable, but it's real, and it's the only thing that can change anything. The Stoics didn't write to make you feel good. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations while his army was dying of plague. Seneca philosophized while Nero decided each day whether that would be his last. Epictetus taught wisdom with a leg broken by his master. They didn't speak from comfort, they spoke from the trenches. And what they discovered in those trenches, what they distilled from real pain, is what has survived 2,000 years. Not because it sounds nice, because it works. In the real world, when everything is falling apart, when you have no answers, when you're completely lost, it works. What I'm going to do is something different, something harder but infinitely more valuable. I'm going to show you that the emptiness you feel, that pain that makes you question whether your life has meaning, isn't your enemy. It's your most brutal teacher. It's the signal that you're waking up, that something in you refuses to keep sleeping, that there's still a part of you buried under years of pretending that remembers life can be more than this, more than appearances, more than accumulation, more than surviving day after day, hoping someday it will all make sense. The next few minutes won't give you comfort. They'll give you truth, and truth hurts before it liberates. It hurts because it forces you to see things you've been avoiding, to admit things you've been denying, to face that maybe you've been building the wrong life with a lot of effort. But that pain, that brutal recognition, is exactly what you need. Because you can't change direction if you pretend you're already going the right way. You can't find your path if you pretend you're not lost. You can't build a meaningful life if you never admit the current one has no meaning. This is the first episode of 12, a series that exists for one reason, because there are thousands of men exactly where you are, successful on paper, lost in essence. With everything that's supposed to matter, but without the only thing that actually matters, knowing why they're doing what they're doing. And this series isn't here to keep you comfortable. It's here to wake you up, to shake you, to confront you with truths the Stoics understood 2,000 years ago, and that remain the only truths that work when life loses meaning. Seneca was the richest man in Rome. He had power, influence, everything. And he wrote from the top, "I've been at the peak of the mountain everyone wants to climb, and the view from here isn't what they promised. It's just another summit." And more emptiness. But he also wrote this from exile, after losing everything. "Now that I have nothing, I can finally see what's the only thing I always had, the ability to choose what my life means. And you have that ability too. Buried, ignored, but there, waiting for you to have the courage to use it." What's coming in this episode are 10 lessons, not advice, not tips, lessons. The difference is that lessons hurt before they heal. They confront you before they console you. They disorient you before they give you direction. Because the first step to finding meaning isn't searching for answers. It's honestly admitting you don't have them. That you've been pretending. That you're lost. Completely lost. And that recognition, even though it feels like defeat, is actually the only real starting point. So prepare yourself, not to feel better, to see clearly, not to hear what you want to hear what you need to face, not for comfort, for transformation. Because at the end of these minutes, one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to close this and go back to pretending everything's fine, that you're just tired, that it's just a phase, or you're going to admit the truth. You're going to recognize that you're lost. You're going to accept that what you've built isn't what you wanted to build. And from that brutal admission, from that painful but liberating recognition, you're going to start the real work. The work of finding yourself, of building a life with real meaning, of stopping the performance and starting to live. Because here's what no one tells you about being lost. It's temporary only if you face it. If you ignore it, if you keep pretending, if you stay busy enough not to have to feel it, it becomes permanent. It becomes your new normal. You get used to the emptiness. You learn to live with it. And one day you wake up and realize you've lived decades on autopilot, and you no longer remember what it feels like to be truly alive. That's what's at stake here. Not just how you feel today, but whether you're going to really live the rest of your life or just exist. And that difference, even though it's not visible from the outside, is everything. This isn't another podcast episode you consume and forget. This is your line in the sand, your moment where you decide whether you keep pretending or start being real, and that decision starts now, in the next few seconds. When you hear the first lesson and have to choose whether to let it in or raise the defenses you've been using for years to avoid having to change anything. If you recognized your life in these words, if that emptiness is real for you, write in the comments, "I'm lost, and today I accept that as my starting point." Not for me, for you, as your first declaration of brutal honesty in a long time. As your commitment that this time you're not going to consume inspiring content and stay the same. This time you're going to act. Write it, now, and then you'll be ready for what's coming. First Stoic lesson. Feeling lost isn't the problem. The problem is you've spent years pretending you know where you're going. Epictetus had a student who showed up every day with all the answers. He knew exactly who he was, what he wanted, where he was going. He spoke with that confidence only possessed by those who've never questioned anything deeply. That certainty, that's ignorance disguised as wisdom. And Epictetus let him talk, day after day, week after week, until one day he gave him a simple task. For 7 nights, before sleeping, write honestly. Why did I do what I did today? Did my actions reflect conscious decisions or just inertia? Am I heading where I really want to go, or am I just following the path others laid out? The student accepted the task with the same confidence as always. Of course he knew why he did what he did. Of course his decisions were conscious. Of course he was going exactly where he wanted. But then he started writing. First night, second night, and the certainty started to crack. Because when you force yourself to answer honestly, when you can't hide behind automatic responses, you discover uncomfortable things. You discover that most of your decisions aren't decisions. They're reactions, inertia, continuing to do what you've always done because changing it would require admitting maybe you shouldn't have started it. On the 7th day, the student came back different. The arrogance had disappeared, and he said something Epictetus had been waiting to hear. "I'm lost. I've been lost for years. I just built such a convincing story about knowing where I was going that even I believed it. But it was fiction. A well-told fiction, but fiction nonetheless. And you are that student. You've built a narrative about your life, a story you tell others and yourself about who you are and what you're doing and why it all makes sense. When they ask how you're doing, you have the answer ready. When they ask what you do, you explain your work as if it's exactly what you always wanted. When they ask where you're headed, you point to goals that sound impressive, and the story holds up. As long as no one, especially you, examines it too closely. But what happens when you do examine it? When you sit alone, without an audience, without needing to impress anyone, and ask yourself with brutal honesty, did I really choose this path? Or did I just take it because it was there? Because it was what everyone expected? Because it was safe? Because I didn't have the courage to imagine something different? The answer terrifies you. Because, if you're honest, if you really look without the layers of justification, you discover you didn't choose. You let yourself drift, taking the path of least resistance. Following what seemed right without ever asking if it was what you wanted. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in his early days as emperor that shows his devastating honesty. I am emperor, and I don't know why. I find myself in this position, and I don't remember choosing to be here. I only remember that one day I wasn't, and the next I was. And now everyone expects me to know exactly what to do, but I don't, and pretending I do is killing me. The most powerful man in the world, admitting privately that he was lost, that his life wasn't a conscious choice but a sequence of events that led him to a place he never asked to be. And that's your story too, not because you're an emperor, because you have a life that looks good from the outside but on the inside feels like it happened to someone else. You find yourself here, in this job, in this city, in these responsibilities. And when you honestly ask yourself, how did I get here? Is this what I wanted? You don't have a clear answer. You just have a series of small decisions that seemed insignificant at the time, but added up to bring you to a place you never planned to be. Seneca saw this constantly in Rome. People running from one place to another, busy, stressed, always with something urgent. And he would ask them something simple that stopped them cold. Where are you going? Not physically, existentially. Where is your life going with all this movement? And they couldn't answer. Because they had never asked themselves the question. They were so busy moving that they never checked if the movement had direction, if all this activity was taking them somewhere they actually wanted to go. And then Seneca would tell them something you need to hear. There is no favorable wind for the ship that doesn't know which port it's heading to. You can be in constant motion, with sails unfurled, working incredibly hard, and still be completely lost. Because movement without direction isn't progress. It's just movement. And that's you, in constant motion, working hard, fulfilling responsibilities, doing everything you're supposed to do, but without real direction, without a clear port you're sailing toward. And as long as you're in motion, as long as you're busy, you can avoid admitting that. You can say, I'm going somewhere. Look how fast I'm moving. But speed doesn't compensate for lack of direction. And the faster you move in the wrong direction, the farther you get from the right place. Epictetus had another devastating question he asked his students. If you could design your ideal life from scratch, without restrictions, without others' expectations, without fear of judgment, what would it look like? And most couldn't answer, because they had never given themselves permission to ask that question. They had been so busy following the predetermined script that they never stopped to ask if that script was the one they wanted to follow. And when they finally tried to imagine it, they discovered something terrifying, that the life they wanted was radically different from the life they were living, that they had been walking in one direction for years, maybe decades, without ever checking if it was the right direction. And here's the most painful part. The further you've walked in the wrong direction, the harder it is to admit it. Because admitting you're lost after 10 years on the same path means admitting you may have wasted 10 years. That all those sacrifices, all those achievements, all those decisions that brought you here were in service of something that wasn't what you really wanted. And that truth is almost impossible to face. So you keep going. You keep pretending you know where you're headed. You keep telling yourself it all makes sense. You keep moving because stopping and admitting you're lost feels like failure. But it's not failure, it's awakening. Because only when you admit you're lost can you start searching for your real path. Only when you recognize that the current path isn't leading where you want can you change direction. Only when you release the illusion of knowing where you're going do you create space to discover where you really want to go. Marcus Aurelius practiced something that saved his sanity: the evening examination. Every night, without fail, he asked himself 3 questions. First, what did I do today that reflected my real values? not what was expected of me, my real values. Second, what did I do only because it was what others expected? Third, if I could repeat today, would I make the same choices? And he was brutally honest with the answers. He didn't lie to himself to feel better. He just recognized the truth. And many nights, most perhaps, he recognized he had spent the day following external expectations more than internal values, that he had performed more than lived, that he had been lost but pretending he knew the way. And that recognition didn't depress him, it freed him, because only when you admit where you really are can you start moving toward where you really want to be. So, here's your task. It's not a suggestion, it's a requirement if you really want to change anything. For the next 7 days, you're going to do Marcus Aurelius's evening examination. Every night, before sleeping, you're going to write the 3 questions honestly, without justifications, without rationalizations, without making your answers sound better than they are. Just brutal truth. 7 days. 7 sessions of honesty that have probably been missing for years. And at the end of those 7 days, you're going to know something you now only suspect. Whether you're really on your path, or whether you've been lost, pretending you know where you're going. And that knowledge, even though it hurts, is exactly what you need. Because you can't change what you don't recognize. You can't fix what you pretend isn't broken. You can't find yourself while you keep pretending you're not lost. Here's the capture moment. Feeling lost isn't your problem. Your problem is you've been pretending for so long you forgot you were pretending. You've built a convincing story about knowing where you're going. But it's fiction. And as long as you keep defending that fiction, as long as you keep acting like you know the way, you'll stay lost. But the moment you admit, I don't know where I'm going, I've been following inertia, I've been lost pretending I know the way, that's the moment everything can change. Where you can stop following the script and start writing your own, where you can release the false direction and search for your real one. So stop pretending, admit you're lost. And from that brutal honesty, start searching for your path, your real path, not the one others laid out, yours. Second Stoic lesson. The emptiness you feel isn't because you're missing something, it's because you're full of things that no longer belong to you. Seneca watched the wealthy Romans with a mix of fascination and sadness. They had everything: houses, careers, recognition, power, everything that's supposed to fill a life. And they were empty, completely empty. They came to him seeking answers, expecting him to tell them what they were missing, what more they needed to acquire, what higher goal they should reach, what possession would finally make them feel complete. And Seneca told them something they didn't want to hear. Your problem isn't that you're missing something, it's that you're full of the wrong things. Your life is so full of others' expectations, of roles you didn't choose, of versions of yourself you built for others, that there's no room left for who you really are. And as long as you keep trying to fill the emptiness with more of the same, the emptiness will only grow. They didn't understand, just as you don't understand now, because your whole life you were taught that emptiness is filled by adding more success, more achievements, more recognition, more things. So you've been accumulating, adding roles, responsibilities, goals, expectations, versions of yourself you project at work, at home, with friends, on social media. And still the emptiness grows. And that confuses you, frustrates you, makes you think you need even more. That when you finally achieve more, have more, become more, the emptiness will disappear. But it doesn't disappear, because the emptiness you feel isn't emptiness of things, it's emptiness of you. You've filled your life with so many expectations that aren't yours, with so many roles you didn't choose, with so many performative versions of who you should be, that there's no room left for who you really are. And that emptiness, that feeling that something fundamental is missing, isn't a sign you need more, it's a sign you need less, much less. Marcus Aurelius inherited an empire. He had no choice. Adopted to be emperor, he received a complete package of expectations before he was old enough to know if he wanted them. Expectations about how he should act, what he should value, who he should be, and he could have simply accepted all of it, filled the role without questioning it, but he didn't. He wrote in his early days as emperor, "I must distinguish between who they expect me to be and who I really am, because if I live only fulfilling expectations, I'll never really live. I'll be a perfect performance of a role I didn't write. And when the applause ends, when I'm alone with my thoughts, I won't have lived at all." That distinction saved his life, because he began to examine everything, every expectation, every role, every belief about who he should be. And he would ask, "Does this really belong to me? Or am I only carrying it because others say I should?" And he discovered that most of what he was carrying wasn't his. It belonged to his culture, his position, his family, Rome's expectations, and slowly, methodically, he started letting go. Not everything at once, but consistently, releasing what wasn't essential. What didn't reflect his real values? What didn't truly belong to him? And you need to do the same. But you're afraid that if you start letting go, if you start questioning everything you think you should be, nothing will remain. That beneath all the roles and expectations there's an even bigger void. That maybe there's no real you beneath all the masks. And that fear paralyzes you, keeps you carrying everything, fulfilling every expectation, being every version others need, even though it's killing you. Epictetus taught something radical. You are not what you possess. You are not your position. You are not your achievements. You are who you choose to be when all of that is stripped away. And then he would do a brutal exercise with his students. He'd ask them to imagine they lost everything: job, house, money, status, reputation, everything. And he'd ask, "Who are you now? With nothing external to define you, who remains?" And most couldn't answer, because they had built their identity entirely on external things: their job, their family role, their achievements, their possessions. And when all of that was stripped away, even just in imagination, they didn't know who they were. They had been so many versions for so many people for so long that they had forgotten if there was anyone real beneath all the performances. And that's your problem. You've defined who you are by what you do, what you have, what you've achieved. Your identity is your job, your position, your responsibilities. And as long as all that is there, you can avoid the fundamental question, who am I really? But when you come home and look in the mirror, when you're alone without an audience, who do you see? Do you see someone real? Or do you see a collection of masks, a series of well-rehearsed performances but no real actor? Seneca practiced something he called voluntary poverty. Once a month he lived as if he had nothing, no luxuries, no comforts, none of the things that defined him socially. And he did it not because he enjoyed discomfort, because he needed to remind himself who he was without all that. He needed to distinguish between what was really his and what he had simply accumulated. And he said those days were the most valuable of the month, because, in the forced simplicity, he rediscovered his essence. And don't tell me you can't do that, that your responsibilities are real, that you have people who depend on you, that you can't just let go of everything. I know. Seneca had real responsibilities too. He was advisor to the emperor. One day of wrong decisions could cost thousands of lives. And still he found time to strip away the non-essential, because he understood that if he didn't, if he kept carrying everything without distinguishing what was his and what wasn't, he would eventually collapse under the weight. And then he wouldn't be able to fulfill even the responsibilities that really mattered. You need your version of that. Days where you release everything that isn't essential, where you stop playing all the roles, where you ask yourself, what of all this that I'm carrying actually belongs to me? And what am I only carrying because I think I should? And the answer will surprise you. You'll discover that most of what you're carrying isn't yours. They're expectations you internalized, roles you adopted to be accepted, versions of yourself you built to survive, but that never reflected who you really are. And here's the liberating part. You don't have to keep carrying what isn't yours. You can let go. You can say, this doesn't belong to me. You can return expectations to whoever placed them on you. You can resign from roles you never wanted. You can stop being performative versions and start being you, authentic, real, even if it means disappointing some people, even if it means looking less impressive from the outside. Marcus Aurelius wrote something you need to engrave in your soul. Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few needs. And the same applies to identity. Real identity doesn't consist of being many things to many people. It consists of being one true thing, yourself. But to get there, you have to release all the false versions, all the unchosen roles, all others' expectations. And the most liberating thing about letting go is that it creates space, not just in your schedule, in your mind, in your life. Space where you can finally breathe, think, feel, be. Space where who you really are can start to emerge without having to compete with 1,000 false versions. So here's your practice. For the next 7 days, every morning you're going to write 3 things you're carrying that don't belong to you. Expectations, roles, beliefs about who you should be, goals you pursue because others said you should. Anything that when you examine it honestly you recognize isn't yours. And next to each one you're going to write, this doesn't belong to me and I choose to let it go. You don't have to let go of everything immediately, but you have to start naming it, recognizing what of all you're carrying isn't yours, because that recognition is the first step toward letting go. And only when you release what isn't yours do you create space for what is. Only when you empty your life of others' expectations is there room for your own. Only when you stop being who others need can you start being who you really are. Here's the capture moment. The emptiness you feel isn't because you're missing something. It's because you're full of things that no longer belong to you. You've accumulated so much, carried so much, been so many versions for so many people, that there's no room left for who you really are. And as long as you keep trying to fill that emptiness with more achievements, more roles, more performative versions, the emptiness will only grow. Because you can't fill an emptiness of authenticity with external things. You can only fill it by releasing the false and allowing the true to emerge. So stop accumulating, start letting go, stop filling. Start emptying. Stop being all the versions others need, and start being the only version that really matters. Yourself, real, without masks. Even if you disappoint some people. Even if you look less impressive, because an authentic life is worth infinitely more than a life full of things that were never really yours. Third Stoic lesson. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire while writing that nothing has permanent meaning, and that didn't paralyze him, it set him free. Marcus Aurelius woke up every morning knowing that everything he built that day could disappear tomorrow. The empire he ruled could collapse. The people he trusted could betray him. The achievements he reached could be forgotten. Nothing was permanent. Nothing was guaranteed. Nothing had fixed, immutable meaning. And instead of paralyzing him, that truth set him completely free. He wrote something that sounds contradictory until you understand it. Everything is ephemeral, both the one who remembers and what is remembered. In a short time you will be dead, and soon not even your name will be remembered. So why does what I do today matter? And after asking that devastating question, he answered with something even more devastating. Precisely because nothing is permanent is why what I do now matters enormously. Because this moment is all I have guaranteed. And you've completely inverted that logic. You believe you need things to have permanent meaning for them to be worth doing. That you need guarantees that what you build will last. That you need to know your impact will be remembered. That your effort will be recognized. That your achievements will matter forever. And because you can't have those guarantees, because you know deep down that everything is temporary, it paralyzes you, makes you feel nothing is worthwhile. That if eventually everything disappears, why build anything? But the Stoics understood something modern culture has forgotten. That meaning doesn't come from permanence, it comes from intention. It doesn't matter if what you build lasts 1,000 years or 1,000 minutes. What matters is why you built it, how you built it, who you were while building it. Because that the person you become in the process of building, that's the only thing that truly belongs to you, and that can't be taken away by time or circumstances. Seneca saw this clearly in Rome. He saw men obsessed with building permanent legacies, monuments with their names, fortunes that would pass to their children, reputations that would last generations. And all that obsession with permanence made them miserable, because they lived in constant anxiety that everything could be lost, that they might be forgotten, that their impact might not last. And that anxiety robbed them of the ability to enjoy the present, to be fully alive now, to find meaning in the moment instead of only in the imagined future. And Seneca told them something radical. Stop trying to build something that lasts forever. Focus on living well today, because one day, well lived, has more value than 1,000 years of mediocre existence. One moment of real virtue matters more than an eternity of empty recognition. And you need to understand this viscerally, because your obsession with finding permanent meaning, with knowing that what you do will matter forever, is paralyzing you. It's preventing you from acting. It's keeping you waiting for total clarity before moving. It's making you postpone living until you finally know what the meaning of everything is. But that clarity never comes. Because the meaning of life isn't something you discover and then live. It's something you build while you live. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire he knew would eventually fall. He made decisions he knew would be forgotten. He built things he knew would be destroyed. And still he got up every morning and did the work. Not because it guaranteed permanence, because it reflected his values now, because he was the person he wanted to be today, because the act of governing well was his purpose, regardless of whether anyone would remember. And he practiced something he called memento mori, remembering you're going to die, not as depression, as liberation. Every morning he reminded himself, today could be my last day. Nothing I have is guaranteed. My life could end at any moment. And instead of paralyzing him, that focused him, made him ask, if this were my last day, how would I want to live it? What would be important to do? Who would I want to be? And the answers were always the same. I would want to be just. I would want to be kind. I would want to help whoever I could help. I would want to live according to my values. I would want to be present with the people I love. None of those things required permanence. None required guarantees. They only required conscious choice in the present moment. And you've been waiting for exactly the opposite. You've been waiting for guarantees before committing, waiting to know your effort will last before making the effort, waiting for certainty that what you build will matter forever before building anything. But that waiting is just another way of avoiding living. It's your way of maintaining the illusion of control while avoiding the real risk of committing to something without guarantees. Epictetus taught his students something brutal. Everything you love will eventually be taken away. Every person you know will die. Everything you build will be destroyed. Every achievement you reach will be forgotten. This is the truth, and you can let that truth paralyze you, or you can let it set you free. And when his students asked how it could be liberating to know everything is temporary, Epictetus responded, "Because if nothing lasts forever, then there's no pressure to build something perfect. No need to wait for the right moment. No reason to postpone living. There's only now, only this moment, only the choice you make today about who you decide to be. And that choice, though temporary, is all you need. And that's your liberation too. Stop searching for permanent meaning. Stop waiting to know that what you do will matter forever. Stop needing guarantees before committing, because all of that is just your ego trying to build something that outlives it. Your need to be remembered, to matter beyond your life, to leave a permanent mark. But the truth is, you won't be remembered, no matter what you build. In 100 years, maybe 50, most people will have forgotten you existed. And that truth isn't depression, it's liberation. Because if you won't be remembered anyway, if nothing you build will last forever, then you're completely free to build what you really want. Not what will impress others. Not what will leave the biggest legacy, just what reflects who you really are. Just what makes you feel alive now. Just what has meaning for you in this moment, without needing it to have meaning for eternity. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations for himself. He never intended them to be published. He never expected anyone else to read them. He wrote only to process his life, to maintain clarity amid chaos, to remind himself of his values when everything pushed him to betray them. And 2,000 years later, those private meditations are still transforming lives, but not because he tried to build a legacy, because he lived authentically without worrying about legacy. And that's the irony. That real impact comes when you stop trying to create impact, when you stop obsessing over permanence and simply live well now. When you stop needing everything to have eternal meaning and find meaning in the present moment. When you stop waiting for guarantees and commit anyway. And the beauty of this truth is that it frees you from the paralyzing pressure of having to build something perfect, of having to wait for the right moment, of having to know exactly how everything will turn out before starting. Because if nothing lasts forever anyway, then there's no pressure to make it perfect. There's only the freedom to make it authentic, to make it yours, to make it now. So here's your practice. Every morning for the next 7 days, you're going to do Marcus Aurelius's Memento Mori exercise. You're going to remind yourself, today could be my last day. Nothing is guaranteed. All I have is this moment. And then you're going to ask yourself, if this were my last day, how would I want to live it? What would be important to do? Who would I want to be? And you're going to write the answers, without censorship, without worrying whether they're realistic or practical, just truth. And you're going to notice something, that your answers don't require permanence. They don't require guarantees. They only require choice. Choice you can make today, now, in this moment. Here's the capture moment. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire knowing everything was temporary, And that didn't paralyze him. It set him free. Because he understood that meaning doesn't come from permanence. It comes from living according to your values now, from being who you want to be today, from acting with integrity in this moment without needing it to matter for eternity. Your obsession with finding permanent meaning is paralyzing you. It keeps you waiting for guarantees that will never come, searching for certainty that doesn't exist, postponing living until you finally know it will matter forever. But you'll never know. And if you keep waiting, you'll waste your life waiting for permission that will never come. So release the need for permanence. Accept that everything is temporary. And from that acceptance, choose to live authentically now. Not because it will last forever, because it matters now. And now is all you have guaranteed. Fourth Stoic lesson. You're searching for purpose outside yourself when the only place it can be born is in the decisions you make today. There's a story about Seneca that changes everything when you understand it. One day, a rich, successful man came to him, a man with everything that's supposed to matter. And he said, "I've traveled the world searching for my purpose. I've consulted philosophers. I've read ancient texts. I've tried different paths, and I still can't find it. Tell me, where is my purpose?" And Seneca looked at him in silence for a long moment. And then he said something that devastated the man. "You've been searching in all the wrong places. Your purpose isn't hidden somewhere waiting for you to discover it. It's not in a book. It's not in a distant land. It's nowhere outside of you. It's in the decision you make right now about how you're going to live. And as long as you keep searching outside, as long as you keep waiting to discover it, you'll remain without it. Because it isn't discovered, it's built. And it's built with every decision you make when no one is watching." And the man didn't understand, just as you don't understand now. Because your whole life you've been taught that purpose is something you find, that there's a right path waiting for you, that if you search long enough, if you try enough things, if you consult enough experts, you'll eventually discover what you're supposed to do. So you've been searching, trying, exploring, waiting for that moment of clarity where everything clicks and you finally know what your purpose is. But that moment never comes. And the more you search outside, the more lost you feel. Because the Stoics knew something the modern self-help industry deliberately ignores. That purpose isn't found. It's built. It's not destiny. It's choice. It's not something you discover one day and then your life has meaning. It's something you build day after day with every small decision about who you decide to be and how you decide to live. Epictetus explained it to his students like this: "Stop searching for the grand purpose as if it were hidden treasure. Purpose isn't a single event, it's daily practice. It's the sum of 1,000 small decisions about acting with integrity when it's difficult, about being kind when it's easier to be cruel, about doing the right thing when no one is watching. Those small, consistent decisions build something greater than any grand purpose you could discover. And you've been waiting for the opposite. You've been waiting for the big, obvious purpose that will give meaning to everything at once, the clear calling, the obvious mission, the unmistakable direction that will finally explain why you're here. But while you wait for that moment of clarity, you're wasting thousands of moments where you could be building purpose with your actions, where you could be being the person you want to be, where you could be living according to your values without waiting for permission or total clarity. Marcus Aurelius never discovered his purpose in some moment of revelation. He built it, decision by decision, day by day. Every time he chose justice over convenience, every time he chose wisdom over popularity, every time he chose integrity over gain. Not because he knew it was his purpose, because he decided those values would define his life. And that decision, repeated consistently, became his purpose. He didn't find it, he created it. And he wrote something you need to understand. Your purpose isn't to do something specific. It's to be someone specific. It's not to reach a certain position. It's to live with certain values. It's not to discover what you're supposed to do. It's to decide who you want to be and then be that person consistently, regardless of your circumstances. And that distinction changes everything. Because if your purpose is to do something specific, you're at the mercy of circumstances. If circumstances don't allow you to do that, you have no purpose. You're lost, waiting for something to change so you can finally live your purpose. But if your purpose is to be someone specific, you can live it now, in any circumstance, in any situation. Because being just, being wise, being honest, being kind, that you can do right now. It doesn't require perfect circumstances, it only requires decision. Seneca practiced something he called values examination. Every night he would ask himself, what values did I demonstrate today with my actions? Not with my words, with my actions. And he would honestly list what values his decisions actually reflected, not what values he claimed to have, what values he demonstrated. And if there was a gap between the values he said he had and the values he demonstrated, that gap was his work for tomorrow, closing that gap, aligning his actions with his declared values. And after years of that daily practice, he didn't need to search for purpose, because he had built it. His purpose was to live according to his values regardless of circumstances. And he could do that every day, in any situation, without waiting for the perfect moment or total clarity, just deciding who he wanted to be and being that person consistently. And you need exactly that practice. But first you need to define your real values, not the values you think you should have, the values that truly reflect who you want to be. And here's the exercise. You're going to write 5 values you want to define your life. Not generic values that sound good. Specific values that when you read them, you recognize as deeply yours. And then every night for the next 7 days, you're going to do Seneca's values examination. You're going to ask yourself, what values did I demonstrate today with my actions? And you're going to be brutally honest. If your actions didn't reflect your declared values, don't punish yourself. Just recognize the gap and ask yourself, what different decision could I have made that would have reflected my values? Marcus Aurelius discovered that when he lived according to his values consistently, difficult decisions became simpler, because he had a clear filter. Does this decision reflect my values or betray them? And that simple question eliminated most options, made the right path obvious, even if it wasn't easy. And that's the power of having clear values and living them consistently. It doesn't make life easier. It makes it clearer. And you're going to notice something after 7 days of this practice. You're going to notice that purpose starts to emerge naturally, not as dramatic discovery, as gradual clarity. Because when you live consistently according to your values, when you align your actions with who you really want to be, purpose stops being an external question. It becomes a natural expression of who you are. Because here's the truth no one tells you. Purpose isn't something big and dramatic that you discover, and then everything changes. It's the sum of small, consistent decisions about being who you want to be. It's choosing integrity when it's difficult. It's choosing kindness when it's easier to be indifferent. It's choosing to do the right thing when no one is watching. Those decisions, repeated day after day, build something more significant than any grand purpose you could discover. Epictetus summarized it perfectly. Don't tell me your values. Show me your calendar and your bank account, and I'll tell you what your real values are. Because your values aren't what you say. They're what you do. And if there's a gap between what you say and what you do, you don't have values. You have aspirations. And aspirations without action aren't purpose. They're fantasy. And that's your gap between who you say you want to be and who you really are when no one is watching. Between the values you claim to have and the values your actions demonstrate. And as long as that gap exists, as long as you keep waiting to discover purpose outside instead of building it with your decisions, you'll stay lost. You'll keep searching. You'll keep waiting for clarity that will never come. But the moment you start closing that gap, the moment you start aligning your actions with your values, the moment you stop searching for purpose outside and start building it with your decisions, that's the moment everything changes. Where purpose stops being endless searching and becomes daily practice, a way of life, who you are. Here's the capture moment. You've been searching for purpose in all the wrong places, in books, in experts, in experiences, in paths others have walked, waiting for that moment of clarity where you finally discover what you're supposed to do. But that moment never comes, because purpose isn't discovered, it's built. With every small decision about who you decide to be today, with every choice about living according to your values or betraying them, with every moment where you can be who you want to be or just pretend you are. So, stop searching outside, define your values, and then live according to them, consistently, without waiting for total clarity, without waiting for perfect circumstances. Just deciding who you want to be and being that person today, now, in this moment. Because purpose isn't hidden, waiting for you to discover it. It's waiting for you to build it. And only you can build it, with your decisions. Starting now. Fifth Stoic lesson. The crisis of meaning you're going through is your mind waking up, not breaking down. Epictetus had a student who arrived at his school in total crisis. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat, he couldn't function. Everything that used to have meaning now felt empty. Everything that used to motivate him now left him indifferent. And he was terrified. He thought he was breaking down, that something fundamental in him was wrong, that maybe he'd never be normal again, that this crisis would destroy him. And Epictetus listened to him describe all his symptoms: the constant anxiety, the emptiness, the inability to find satisfaction in what used to satisfy him, the feeling of being disconnected from his own life. The constant question, "What's the point?" that had no answer. And when the student finished speaking, expecting Epictetus to tell him how to fix what was broken, Epictetus said something completely unexpected. "Congratulations." The student looked at him confused. "Congratulations for what? For falling apart?" And Epictetus explained, "You're not falling apart, you're waking up. Everything you described aren't symptoms of collapse, they're symptoms of awakening. Your mind is rejecting the comfortable lies that kept you asleep. It's questioning the things you accepted without examining. It's searching for real truth instead of continuing to pretend that superficial answers are enough. And yes, that process feels like dying. Because in a sense it is. The version of you that lived on autopilot is dying, and the version that really thinks is being born, that really questions, that really searches. And the student didn't feel better immediately, because waking up hurts, questioning everything hurts, releasing comfortable certainties hurts. But he understood something fundamental, that the pain didn't mean something was wrong, it meant something was finally right, that after years of sleeping, he was finally waking up. And awakening is never comfortable. And you're in exactly that process. The crisis you're going through, that emptiness you feel, that inability to find satisfaction in what used to satisfy you, it's not collapse. It's awakening. Your mind refuses to keep sleeping, refuses to keep accepting superficial answers, refuses to keep pretending everything makes sense when you know it doesn't. And that refusal, that unwillingness to stay asleep, feels like crisis. But it's the healthiest process you could go through. Because the Stoics understood something modern psychology is rediscovering. That existential crises aren't bugs in the system, they're features, they're not malfunction. They're the system functioning exactly as it should. Because a healthy mind eventually questions, eventually searches for deeper meaning, eventually refuses to stay on autopilot. And when that happens, when the mind wakes up and starts questioning everything, it feels like crisis. But it's the beginning of something much better than what came before. Marcus Aurelius went through multiple existential crises. He documented them in his meditations, moments where he questioned everything, where nothing made sense, where life felt empty no matter how much he achieved. And instead of trying to suppress those crises, he embraced them, explored them, used them as fuel to question deeper, to search for more real answers, to build philosophy that actually worked in the real world. And he wrote something you need to tattoo on yourself. Crisis doesn't come to destroy you, it comes to wake you up. And awakening always feels like destruction at first, because it requires releasing everything you thought you knew, everything you took for granted, everything that made you feel safe, even though it was false. But on the other side of that destruction is something more valuable than any false security: real truth, real life, real you. And you're in the middle of that process, between the destruction of the false and the construction of the real. And that's the most uncomfortable position that exists. Because you can't go back to sleep anymore. You can't pretend superficial answers are enough anymore, but you haven't yet built the deep answers you need. You're in limbo, and that limbo feels unbearable. But Seneca taught something crucial about that limbo. The space between releasing the false and finding the true is the most fertile space that exists. That's where all real transformation happens. But it requires you to tolerate the discomfort of not having answers, of not knowing, of being in transit. And most people can't tolerate that discomfort. So they go back to the false because at least it's familiar, and they never reach the true. And that's your temptation, to go back to the familiar, to suppress the questions, to distract yourself enough not to have to feel the emptiness, to convince yourself everything's fine when you know it isn't, because that's more comfortable than staying in the limbo of not knowing, than continuing to question without having clear answers, than continuing to feel the emptiness while you search for what can really fill it. But if you go back now, if you suppress this awakening, if you settle for going back to sleep, you'll waste the greatest opportunity that exists. Because these moments of crisis, these moments of deep questioning, don't come frequently. And when they come, either you use them to transform, or you suppress them and go back to the same. There's no middle ground. Either you wake up completely, or you go back to sleep. And if you go back to sleep now, you may never again have the courage to wake up. Epictetus told his students something that sounds harsh but is true. Most people live asleep their entire lives. They're born, they grow up, they work, they reproduce, they age, they die. And they never really wake up. They never question deeply. They never search for real truth. They just follow the script they were given. And when they're finally dying, in their last moments, they wake up and they realize they never really lived. They just existed. They just played the role. They just followed the script without ever asking if it was the right script. and then it's too late to live differently. All that's left is to regret what could have been. And you have the opportunity now to wake up before it's too late. This crisis, this emptiness, this questioning is your mind refusing to live asleep. It's your opportunity to wake up while you still have time to build a real life, to search for real answers, to really be you instead of just playing the role you were given. Marcus Aurelius wrote about his own crises. There were moments when everything lost meaning, when I couldn't see any reason to continue, when the weight of everything was unbearable. And in those moments, I had two options: suppress and go back to functioning on automatic, or explore and see what it was trying to teach me. And every time I chose to explore, every time I had the courage to sit with the emptiness instead of running from it, I emerged stronger, clearer, more aligned with who I really wanted to be. And that's your choice too. You can see this crisis as an enemy that needs to be defeated, or you can see it as a teacher that needs to be heard. You can try to go back to how you were before it started, or you can use it to become who you're meant to be. You can suppress and go back to sleep, or you can explore and wake up completely. And that choice, even though it doesn't feel like a choice in the middle of the pain, is the most important choice you'll make. So here's your practice. For the next 7 days, you're not going to try to fix the crisis. You're not going to look for ways to make it disappear. You're not going to suppress the emptiness. You're going to explore it. You're going to sit with it. You're going to ask it, what are you trying to teach me? What part of my life is asking for change? What truth am I avoiding seeing? And you're going to write what emerges, without censorship, without judging, without trying to make it sound good or correct. Just brutal truth, because the emptiness speaks in whispers. And you can only hear it when you stop shouting over it, because the emptiness isn't your enemy, it's your most brutal teacher, and it's trying to show you something you need to see, something about how you've been living, something about who you've been being, something about what needs to change. But it can only teach you if you stop fighting against it and start listening to it. Here's the capture moment. The crisis you're going through isn't destruction, it's awakening. Your mind is refusing to keep sleeping, to keep accepting superficial answers, to keep pretending everything makes sense when you know it doesn't. And yes, that process hurts. It feels like collapse. It feels like something fundamental is broken. But it's not. Something fundamental is finally waking up. And on the other side of this awakening, if you have the courage not to go back to sleep, there's real life, real truth, real you. So don't suppress the crisis. Explore it. Don't fight against the emptiness. Listen to it. Don't try to go back to how you were before, because that version of you was asleep, and now you're waking up. And even though waking up hurts, it's infinitely better than staying asleep. Sixth Stoic lesson. Seneca lost everything, was exiled, and from that emptiness built the philosophy that's speaking to you 2,000 years later. Seneca had it all. He was the richest man in Rome. His fortune was obscene, even by Roman standards. He had political power, as advisor to the emperor, influence that moved empires, recognition as a philosopher and playwright, houses in the most exclusive locations, servants, luxuries, everything Roman culture defined as absolute success, and he was profoundly miserable. He wrote during that period of abundance, "I've reached the peak everyone wants to climb, and from here I can see that the peak is empty, that everything I accumulated fills nothing, that success according to others is failure according to my soul." But he kept accumulating, because he didn't know what else to do, because letting go of everything seemed impossible, because admitting he'd been chasing the wrong goals for decades was too painful. So he followed the script, accumulated more wealth, sought more power, wrote works that impressed, but that he himself knew were empty. He lived on sophisticated autopilot, successful on the outside, empty on the inside, exactly like you right now, until everything collapsed. A new emperor took power, Nero, and Nero decided Seneca was a threat. Or maybe he simply wanted his riches, or maybe it was whim. It doesn't matter. What matters is that from one day to the next, Seneca lost everything. They confiscated his properties, they stripped his position, they exiled him to Corsica, a remote island, primitive, without the luxuries he was accustomed to, without the recognition, without the power, without anything that had defined his life for decades. And you'd expect that to destroy him, that a man who'd had everything and lost it would completely crumble, that he'd fall into terminal depression, that he'd give up. But something completely different happened, something you need to understand viscerally. Seneca wrote from exile the most profound letters of his life. He developed his most important philosophical ideas. He found clarity he never had when he had everything. And he wrote something that summarizes his transformation. I had to lose everything to discover what was the only thing I really needed. The ability to choose what my life means, regardless of my circumstances. That exile, that forced collapse of everything he'd built, was his liberation, because he finally had to release the illusions. He finally had to face who he was without all the masks he'd worn for decades. He finally had to ask himself what really mattered, when everything superficial was stripped away. And in that forced emptiness, in that total dispossession, he found something he never found in abundance: his true self, his real voice, his genuine wisdom. And from that emptiness, he built something that survived 2,000 years. His letters from exile are still read. His ideas still transform lives. His philosophy still speaks truth. While all his wealth disappeared, all his political power was forgotten. All his properties turned to dust. What he built from emptiness lasted. What he accumulated in abundance lasted nothing. And you're in your own exile. Not literal, but equally real. Exiled from yourself. Disconnected from who you really are. Living in foreign land, even though it's your own life. And that exile feels like punishment, like evidence that something's wrong, like a sign that you failed. But it's exactly the opposite. It's your opportunity to release the superficial and find the essential, to lose what doesn't matter, to gain what really matters, to strip away the illusions, to finally see clearly. Seneca wouldn't have written his best works if he hadn't lost everything. Abundance kept him comfortable. Power kept him distracted. Recognition kept him playing a role instead of being real. He needed the exile. He needed the emptiness. He needed to lose everything to finally find himself. And you need the same. You don't need more abundance. You need fewer illusions. You don't need more external achievements. You need more internal honesty. You don't need to fill the emptiness. You need to inhabit it long enough for it to teach you what only emptiness can teach. But there's something more important in Seneca's story you need to understand. The exile wasn't just physical loss of things. It was death of ego. It was collapse of identity built on externals. It was the end of the person he'd been for decades. And that death, though terrifying, was necessary. Because as long as he remained Seneca the wealthy, Seneca the powerful, Seneca the imperial advisor, he couldn't be Seneca the authentic. The masks were too comfortable. The roles too defined. The external identity too strong. The exile forced him to release all of that. In Corsica, he wasn't anyone special. He had no power. He had no influence. He couldn't impress with wealth. He was just a man, alone, with his thoughts, his values, his essence without adornment. And in that forced simplicity, he discovered he was enough. That who he was without all the external trappings was more real, more valuable, more authentic than who he'd been with everything. He wrote from exile, "I've discovered that I'm more myself with nothing than I was with everything, because with everything I was playing role after role. With nothing, I can only be me." And that's the liberation I was seeking without knowing I was seeking it. I didn't find it in abundance. I found it in total dispossession. And your current emptiness is your Corsica. It's your forced exile from illusions. It's your opportunity to die to false identities so you can be born to your real identity. But you're afraid of that death. You're afraid of releasing who you've been. You're afraid that if you let go of the masks, there'll be nothing underneath. So you cling. You resist. You fight against the emptiness instead of inhabiting it. And as long as you fight, as long as you resist, you can't learn what only emptiness can teach. Because emptiness is a brutal but effective teacher. It forces you to release what isn't essential. It makes you face who you are without the external crutches. It reveals what really matters when everything superficial is removed. And those lessons, though painful, are the only ones that can truly transform you, because they come from lived experience, not abstract theory. They come from having lost and survived, from having been stripped and found that you still remain, that you still are, that you can still create meaning even when everything else disappears. Marcus Aurelius understood this too. He wrote, "Prosperity allows you to live in illusion. Adversity forces you to live in truth, and only truth, though it hurts, can set you free. And your current emptiness is your adversity. It's your forced exile from comfortable illusions. It's your opportunity to live in truth for the first time, but only if you stop fighting against it. Only if you stop trying to fill it with more of the same that left you empty. Only if you have the courage to inhabit it and learn from it." And it's not just that emptiness teaches you, it's that emptiness forces you to build from truth. When you have abundance, you can build on comfortable lies, and it works temporarily. When you have power, you can avoid facing your weaknesses. When you have recognition, you can hide behind image. But when all that is stripped away, when you're alone with who you really are, you can't lie anymore. You can't avoid anymore. You can't hide anymore. You can only build from truth. And what you build from truth, even if it's small, is infinitely more solid than what you built from illusion, even if it seemed grand. So here's your practice. For the next 7 days, you're going to practice what Seneca called voluntary mental poverty. Every day, you're going to identify one illusion you've been carrying, a belief about what you need to be happy that maybe isn't true, a goal you pursue because you're supposed to, not because you really want it, a version of success you adopted from others, and you're going to release it mentally. You're going to ask yourself, what would happen if I never achieved this? Could I still be okay? Could I still create a meaningful life? And what you'll discover, if you do this honestly, is that you can. That almost everything you believe you need is optional. That the emptiness you fear so much is actually space. Space where you can finally breathe, think, feel, be who you really are, without having to carry all the expectations and beliefs and goals that were never really yours. And in that space, like Seneca in his exile, you can start building something real, something that lasts, something that matters. Here's the capture moment. Seneca lost everything: his wealth, his power, his position, everything that had defined his life. And from that forced emptiness, he built the philosophy that still transforms lives 2,000 years later. Because emptiness isn't the end, It's the beginning. It's where the superficial burns away and the essential emerges. It's where illusions die and truth is born. So stop fighting against your emptiness. Stop trying to fill it with more of the same. Inhabit it, learn from it, because what you build from that emptiness will be the only thing that truly lasts, the only thing that truly matters, the only thing that's truly yours. Seventh Stoic lesson. You don't need to find your purpose. You need to stop running from yourself long enough to hear it. Epictetus had a student who was obsessed with finding his purpose. He'd traveled throughout the empire, consulting oracles. He'd studied with multiple teachers. He'd read every available philosophical text. He'd meditated for hours. He'd done every self-knowledge exercise, and he still didn't know what his purpose was. And every day that passed without finding it frustrated him more, made him more desperate, made him feel more lost. And one day he came to Epictetus completely exhausted and said, "I've searched for my purpose everywhere. I've done everything I'm supposed to do. Why can't I find it? What's wrong with me that I can't discover what I'm here for?" And Epictetus looked at him with that look he had, penetrating but compassionate, and said something that left him silent. "Your problem isn't that you can't find your purpose. Your problem is that you can't stay still long enough to hear it. You've been running from yourself with such intensity, with such consistency, that your purpose has been screaming at you for years, and you haven't heard it because you never stopped the noise." The student protested immediately. "But I've been searching. I've dedicated years to this search. How can you say I'm running?" And Epictetus responded with a question. "When was the last time you sat in complete silence, without distractions, without an agenda, without trying to find answers, just present with yourself?" And the student couldn't answer, because he'd never done that. All his searching had been activity, going from teacher to teacher, from book to book, from technique to technique, but never real stillness, never genuine silence, never simple presence with himself. And you are that student exactly. You've been searching for your purpose while doing everything possible to avoid having to be with yourself. You fill your time with constant activity, your mind with infinite content, your days with endless occupation, and you call it searching, you call it personal growth, you call it inner work, but it's sophisticated escape. It's running disguised as development. It's your way of keeping yourself in constant motion so you never have to stop and really listen to what's inside you. Because really listening is scary. It requires stillness that terrifies you. It requires silence where all your excuses crumble. It requires presence where you can't hide behind the next activity. It requires facing what you've been avoiding, the questions you don't want to answer, the truths you don't want to admit, the changes you know you need to make but that terrify you. So you keep moving, keep searching outside, keep filling the silence with noise. And you call that purpose-seeking when really it's running from yourself. Seneca explained it this way: "The man who's constantly in motion never discovers anything, because discovery requires stillness. It requires stopping long enough for what was always there to finally become visible." Your purpose isn't something you find by running faster. It's something you discover by finally stopping the run. And Marcus Aurelius practiced this religiously. Every night, no matter how chaotic the day had been, he sat in complete silence, not to meditate in the modern sense, not to search for answers, just to be present with himself, to listen without agenda, to allow his mind to settle, to let his true self speak without the constant noise of external demands. And from that daily stillness, he wrote his meditations. From that regular silence, he found clarity that no amount of activity had given him. And here's what makes this even harder. Your escape from yourself is so sophisticated you don't even recognize it as escape. You've dressed it in the clothes of productivity, of personal growth, of continuous improvement, always learning something new, always working on yourself, always seeking the next technique, the next book, the next insight. And it looks like development, like evolution, like genuine searching. But ask yourself honestly, when was the last time you simply were with yourself, without doing anything, without improving anything, without searching for anything, just being? The answer probably makes you uncomfortable, because you've been running while disguising the running as searching. And that's the most dangerous kind of escape, because you can do it for decades feeling like you're doing the right work. Marcus Aurelius saw this in other leaders constantly. Men who never stopped, always busy, always in meetings, always managing crises, and they looked important, dedicated, committed. But he knew the truth. They were running from themselves, from difficult questions, from uncomfortable truths, from necessary changes. They used busyness as a shield, as the perfect excuse to never have to stop and really look at their lives. And eventually, when circumstances forced them to stop, they collapsed, because they'd never built anything internal. They'd only maintained external motion. Because your purpose is already inside you. It's not something you need to discover, like hidden treasure. It's something you need to stop drowning with constant noise. It's a voice that's been speaking for years, but that you've been silencing with infinite occupation, with constant distractions, with frantic searching everywhere except the only place where it is. Inside you, in the stillness, in the silence, in simple presence with yourself. But you've made stillness your enemy. You avoid it like it's dangerous. You fill every moment with something: music, podcasts, videos, social media, work. Anything that keeps your mind occupied. That prevents you from having to be alone with your thoughts. That lets you keep running from yourself. And as long as you keep running, your purpose can scream all it wants, you won't hear it, because you never stop the noise long enough. Epictetus gave his students a simple but terrifying task: sit in complete silence for 1 hour, without distractions, without an agenda, without trying to meditate or find answers. Just sit and observe what arises. And most couldn't do it. The first 10 minutes were fine. Then 20 minutes of growing discomfort. Then 30 minutes where every fiber of their being wanted to stand up and do something, anything. And those who forced themselves to stay, those who had the courage to push through the discomfort, discovered something revealing: that beneath the noise there was a voice, that beneath the distraction there was clarity, that beneath the constant busyness there was purpose waiting to be heard. Because here's the truth you need to face: your constant search for purpose is a way to avoid living according to the purpose you already know. At some deep level, you already know what matters. You already know which values are yours. You already know which direction you should take. But that direction requires changes that scare you, decisions that make you uncomfortable, releasing things that took you years to build. So you keep searching, hoping to find a different purpose, one that doesn't require so much sacrifice, one that's more comfortable, one you can pursue without having to change much. But that purpose doesn't exist. Your true purpose, the one waiting for you in the silence, requires exactly the changes you've been avoiding. And as long as you keep searching for comfortable alternatives, as long as you keep waiting for purpose that doesn't require real transformation to appear, you'll stay lost. Not because your purpose isn't clear, because you don't want to face what you already know. You don't want to do what you already know you need to do. So you keep searching, keep running, keep filling the silence with noise. And you call that searching when really it's evasion. And you need to do exactly this, not as an abstract exercise, as an absolute requirement if you really want to find your purpose, because you're not going to find it in another book. You're not going to discover it in another podcast. It's not going to be revealed by another coach. It's not going to come from outside. It can only emerge from inside. And it can only emerge when you finally stop running and create the space to hear it. So here's your non-negotiable task. For the next 7 days, you're going to sit in complete silence for 30 minutes each day. No guided meditation, no background music, no trying to find answers. Just silence, just stillness, just presence with yourself. And you're going to let whatever arises arise, without judging it, without trying to fix it, without doing anything with it, just listening. The first days will be uncomfortable. Your mind will race. You'll want to get up. You'll find 1,000 excuses to do this later, but you're going to stay. Because this isn't optional if you really want to find your purpose. And by the 4th, 5th day, something will start to change. The internal noise will start to settle. And beneath the noise, you'll start to hear something. Maybe it won't be clear, dramatic revelation, but it will be something. A voice you've been ignoring, a direction you've been resisting, a truth you've been avoiding. And that voice, that whisper that's only audible in stillness, is your purpose waiting for you. Here's the capture moment. Your purpose isn't lost. You don't need to search for it anymore. You just need to stop running from yourself long enough to hear it. Because it's always been there, speaking to you, guiding you, waiting for you. But you've been making too much noise to hear it. You've been too busy searching outside to notice it was always inside. So stop searching. Start listening, create silence, inhabit stillness, and in that space you've avoided so much, you'll finally hear what was always waiting for you, your purpose, your truth, your real path. Not revealed by external forces, emerged from within you, where it always was, waiting for you to finally stop running and listen. 8th Stoic lesson: meaning isn't discovered. It's built with every action you choose when no one's watching. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in his Meditations that most people completely misunderstand. He wrote, "The meaning of your life is what you do when no one is watching." People read that and think it refers to integrity, to being the same person in private as in public. And yes, that's part of it. But there's something deeper, something you need to understand if you really want to build a meaningful life. What Marcus was really saying is that meaning isn't public performance. It's not what you do to impress. It's not your visible achievements. It's not your carefully constructed image. Real meaning, the kind that really matters, the kind that really fulfills, is built in private moments. In the small decisions no one sees, in the actions that don't earn you recognition, in the choices you make only because you decided to be a certain kind of person, not because you expect external reward. And you've completely inverted that equation. You've made public achievements your measure of meaning. You've defined your worth by what others can see, by your visible work, your shareable successes, your Instagram-worthy life. And so you spend your days building that external image, working on what makes you look good, achieving things that impress, creating a version of yourself others admire. And you call that building a meaningful life. But it's building image, not meaning. Because real meaning isn't built in the actions you do for an audience. It's built in the actions you take when you're completely alone, when no one's watching, when there's no possibility of recognition, when there's no external reward waiting, when the only reason to do it is because you decided it matters, because it reflects your values, because it's who you decided to be. Those invisible actions, those private decisions, those choices no one applauds, that's where meaning that truly fulfills is built. Seneca practiced this meticulously. He had a private list of daily actions no one knew he did. They weren't grand, they were small, helping someone anonymously, doing work no one would see, keeping his word on promises no one verified, acting with integrity in moments where he could have taken shortcuts without consequences. And those invisible actions, that private character building, gave him more satisfaction than all his public achievements, because they came from within, because they didn't depend on external validation, because they were completely his. And you need that desperately. You need actions that are only yours, that no one sees, that no one applauds, that no one recognizes, but that you know you did because you decided who to be. Because meaning that comes from external validation is fragile. It depends on others. It can be taken away. It can be lost. But meaning you build in private actions according to your values is yours. No one can take it from you. No one can invalidate it, because it comes from you, because you built it with your own hands when no one was watching. Epictetus asked his students something that made them profoundly uncomfortable. Who are you when no one's watching? Are you the same person as when everyone's watching, or are you a different version? And if you're different, which one is real? And most had to admit they were different, that in public they performed a certain version, but in private they were something else. And that gap between who they performed being and who they really were was a source of constant emptiness, because meaning can't be built on performance. It can only be built on authenticity. And that gap exists in you too. There's a public version of you that you project, and there's a private version only you know. And as long as that gap exists, as long as you keep being one person for others and another for yourself, the emptiness will persist, because you're building external image instead of internal substance. And image, no matter how impressive, never fills the internal void. Only substance can do that. And substance is built in private, in the actions only you know about. Marcus Aurelius spent time every day doing things no one knew about, not because they were dramatic secrets, because they were private actions of character building. He wrote his meditations with no intention of publishing. He practiced virtues in private with no audience. He made difficult decisions when he could have made easy ones, and no one would have known. And those private actions gave him more meaning than publicly ruling the empire, because they were authentic, because they were his, because they built who he really was, not who he appeared to be. Epictetus had a phrase he constantly repeated to his students. If you need an audience to act with virtue, your virtue is performance, not real virtue. And that devastated his students, because they realized that many of their good actions were performative. They did them when people were watching, when they could earn recognition, when there was possibility of social reward. But in private, when no one saw, they took shortcuts, compromised values, did what was convenient over what was right. And not because they were bad people, because they'd built their sense of worth on external validation. They needed others to see their good actions, to feel they mattered. They needed recognition to feel they were doing something significant. They needed audience to feel they had meaning, and that dependence on external validation made them vulnerable, fragile, because their meaning depended on factors they couldn't control, on what others thought, on what others recognized, on what others applauded. But meaning built on internal validation is unbreakable, because it comes from you, from your private decisions, from your invisible actions, from maintaining your values when no one's watching, from being who you decided to be regardless of whether anyone notices or applauds. And that meaning, because it doesn't depend on externals, can never be taken, can never be invalidated. It's completely yours. Seneca practiced what he called anonymous donations of character. Every week, he did something significant that no one knew about. He helped someone in ways they'd never know who it was. He donated money anonymously. He did work that would never carry his name. He made difficult decisions when he could have taken easy ones, and no one would have known the difference. And he kept a private record of these actions, not to brag, to remind himself who he'd decided to be. And he reported that those anonymous actions gave him more profound satisfaction than all his public achievements combined, because they were pure, because they weren't contaminated with need for recognition, because they reflected his values without expectation of reward, because they built real character instead of empty image. And at the end of his life, when he was forced to take his own life, what sustained him wasn't his public achievements, it was those private actions accumulated over decades, because those were real, those were his, those had built who he really was. And you need to build that bank of private actions. You need decisions only you know about. You need integrity no one applauds. You need virtue no one sees. Because that's what builds unbreakable meaning. That's what sustains you when everything external collapses. That's the only thing that truly fills the emptiness you feel. Not your visible achievements, your invisible decisions, not your public image, your private substance, not what you do for an audience. What you do when no one's watching because you decided it matters. So here's your transformative practice. For the next 7 days, you're going to do one daily action no one sees, an action that reflects your values, that builds who you want to be, but that you don't share with anyone, that you don't post, that you don't mention, that you don't use to impress. That is completely private, where the only reason to do it is that you decided it matters, not because it will earn you recognition, because it reflects who you decided to be. It can be small, helping anonymously, doing work no one will see, keeping a promise no one will verify, acting with integrity when you could take a shortcut without consequences, whatever it is. But private, completely yours. And at the end of 7 days, you're going to discover something revealing, that those private actions gave you more real satisfaction than many of your public achievements, because they came from within, because they were authentic, because they built real substance instead of empty image. Here's the capture moment. Meaning isn't discovered in your public achievements. It's built in your private actions, in the decisions you make when no one's watching, in the choices you make because you decided who to be, not because you expect recognition. So stop building only for an audience. Start building for yourself. Create private actions only you know about, that reflect your values, that are authentic. Because that meaning, the one you build in private, is the only one that truly fulfills, the only one that truly lasts, the only one that's truly yours. 9th Stoic lesson. Being lost is the prerequisite for finding yourself. No one who already knows where they are searches for a new path. Marcus Aurelius observed the Roman senators in Senate meetings. Everyone spoke with absolute certainty. Each one knew exactly what to do, how to solve every problem, what decision to make in every crisis. They never admitted doubt, never acknowledged uncertainty, never said, "I don't know," because admitting you didn't know something was admitting weakness. And in Rome, weakness destroyed you politically. So everyone pretended to know, everyone performed certainty, everyone projected unshakable confidence. And Marcus watched them with a mix of pity and concern. because he knew something they didn't, that their certainty was a prison, that their need to always know kept them trapped in the same solutions, the same patterns, the same repeated mistakes, because no one who believes they already know searches for new answers. No one who's sure of their path considers alternative paths. No one who fakes certainty can learn something that contradicts what they think they know. He wrote in his private meditations, "The most dangerous men in the Senate aren't those who know they don't know. They're those who don't know they don't know, who believe they know, when in reality they're operating on assumptions never questioned. And their certainty makes them impervious to new information, makes them incapable of adapting, makes them fragile disguised as strong. And you've been that. You've faked certainty for years. You've acted like you knew exactly what you were doing, like your decisions were the result of careful analysis instead of inertia, like your path was consciously chosen instead of automatically followed. And that faked certainty kept you trapped, because as long as you pretend you know where you're going, you'll never question whether it's where you want to go. As long as you perform security about your path, you'll never consider alternative paths. As long as you project confidence in your decisions, you'll never examine whether those decisions reflect your values or just your fears. And now you're lost, completely lost, and you think that's failure. That being unable to fake certainty any longer is weakness. That admitting you don't know is surrender. But it's exactly the opposite. Being lost is the first step toward really finding yourself. Because only when you admit you don't know can you start truly searching. Only when you release the faked certainty do you create space for real discovery. Only when you recognize you're lost can you start finding a path that truly belongs to you. Epictetus had a saying he constantly repeated. The student who arrives saying, "I already know," leaves knowing exactly the same. The student who arrives saying, "I don't know," leaves transformed. Because the one who thinks they know has a closed mind. They can't receive new information because it's already full of certainties. They can't consider different perspectives because they've already decided which is correct. They can't change because changing would require admitting they were wrong, and that admission is too costly for their ego. But the one who admits they don't know has an open mind. They can receive new information because they recognize they need it. They can consider different perspectives because they're not married to any. They can change because they don't have ego invested in maintaining a particular position. And that openness, that vulnerability of not knowing, is exactly what allows real transformation. And being lost gives you that openness forcefully. It shatters your faked certainty. It crumbles your unquestioned assumptions. It reveals that what you thought was solid was fragile. And that destruction, though it hurts deeply, is your liberation, because you can finally question everything. You can finally examine without fear of what you find. You can finally truly search because you admitted you don't know. And only from that honest admission can genuine discovery emerge. Seneca explained it with a perfect metaphor. The traveler who believes they know the path perfectly never discovers anything new. They follow the memorized route. They see only what they expect to see. They arrive exactly where they plan to arrive. But the traveler who admits they're lost looks with new eyes. They see paths the other ignored. They discover places the other never found. And though they arrive at a destination different from planned, they arrive at a destination truly worth reaching because they discovered it, not followed it. And you are that lost traveler, and you can lament it. You can curse being lost. You can despair about returning to the certainty you had before. Or you can use being lost for what it really is, an opportunity to discover paths you never would have considered if you'd followed the memorized route. An opportunity to see options you never saw when you pretended to know. An opportunity to find destinations you never would have sought when you believed you already knew where you were going. Marcus Aurelius practiced something he called intentional ignorance. Every month he chose something he believed he knew with certainty, and he forced himself to examine it as if he knew nothing, to question it from scratch, to consider alternatives he would normally dismiss, and he constantly discovered that what he thought he knew was assumption, that his certainty was a fragile construction without solid foundation, that he was more lost than he admitted, and those discoveries, far from weakening him, strengthened him because they kept him flexible, adaptable, open, capable of changing when change was necessary, and you need that desperately. You need to release your need to always know. You need to embrace not knowing as a valuable state, not as a defect to hide. You need to use being lost as an opportunity for real searching, not as a problem to quickly fix. Because as long as you keep seeing being lost as a state to escape, you'll keep running toward the first certainty you find, toward the first answer that feels solid, toward the first path that seems safe, and you'll repeat exactly the pattern that left you lost in the first place. But if you embrace being lost, if you recognize that not knowing is the prerequisite for discovering, if you use this uncertainty as space for genuine exploration, then you can find something you never would have found from faked certainty. You can discover paths you never would have considered from false security. You can build a life that truly belongs to you instead of a life you simply adopted because it seemed right. Epictetus gave his students an exercise that terrified them. Identify 3 things you believe you know with certainty about yourself, about who you are, what you want, where you're going, and then, for 1 week, live as if you knew none of that, as if you were a blank page, as if you could be anything, and observe what emerges when you're not limited by your certainties about who you think you are. And the students who did this honestly discovered something revealing, that many of their certainties were prisons, that what they thought they knew about themselves was limitation, not truth, that being lost, far from being a state to fear, was liberation from false identities they'd adopted without questioning. And from that genuine state of being lost, from that authentic not knowing, they could start building something real, something that emerged from who they really were, not from who they thought they should be. So, here's your task, and it's going to make every fiber of your certainty needing being uncomfortable. For the next 7 days, you're going to practice not knowing. Every time you find yourself saying, "I know that," you're going to pause. You're going to ask yourself, do I really know this? Or is it an assumption I never questioned? Or is it faked certainty to avoid the vulnerability of not knowing? And you're going to allow yourself the honest answer, even if that answer is, no, I don't really know. And you're going to keep a list of all the certainties you discover aren't so certain, all the things you thought you knew that turn out to be assumptions, all the truths about yourself that turn out to be constructions. And at the end of 7 days, you're going to have a map of your real ignorance. And that map, though humbling, is more valuable than any map of faked certainty, because that map shows you where you really need to explore, where you really need to search, where you can really discover something new. Here's the capture moment. Being lost isn't the problem. It's the prerequisite for really finding yourself. Because no one who pretends to know truly searches. No one who performs certainty genuinely explores. No one who projects security discovers something new. Only the one who admits they're lost has a mind open for real discovery. Only the one who acknowledges not knowing can learn something transformative. Only the one who embraces uncertainty can find a path that truly belongs to them. So stop fighting against being lost. Stop trying to recover faked certainty. Embrace not knowing. Inhabit uncertainty. Use being lost for what it really is, your opportunity to find something real for the first time. Something that isn't just repetition of what others told you you should be. Something that emerges from who you really are when you finally admit you don't know who you're supposed to be. 10th Stoic lesson. This moment of emptiness is the fertile ground where the person you're meant to be will be born. But only if you stop cursing the soil and start planting. Seneca received another letter from his friend years after the exile. The friend had been in crisis the entire time, still lost, still without meaning, still feeling empty. And he wrote with bitterness, "Years have passed. I've waited for this crisis to end. I've waited for meaning to return. I've waited for the emptiness to fill, but nothing changes. I'm exactly where I was, lost, empty, without direction. When does this end? When can I finally really live?" And Seneca responded with brutal honesty the friend didn't want to hear. "You're where you were because you've spent years waiting for something to change without doing anything to change anything. You've treated your crisis as a storm to survive instead of soil to cultivate. You've cursed the emptiness instead of using it. You've resisted being lost instead of exploring it. And as long as you keep waiting for circumstances to change without you changing, you'll stay exactly where you are, forever. Your emptiness isn't temporary punishment, it's fertile soil. But the most fertile soil in the world produces nothing if no one plants. You can have perfect earth and starve if you never plant anything. And you've been standing on fertile soil for years, complaining that nothing grows, without ever having planted a single seed. The emptiness doesn't fill itself. You have to fill it. Direction doesn't appear magically. You have to create it. A meaningful life doesn't arrive as a gift. You have to build it. And as long as you keep waiting passively, nothing will ever change. And you are that friend exactly. You've been in crisis for months, maybe years. You've felt the emptiness. You've recognized being lost. You've admitted something has to change. And then you've waited. You've waited for change to come on its own. You've waited for meaning to magically appear. You've waited for clarity to reach you. You've waited for someone or something to tell you exactly what to do. And while you wait, nothing changes. And you get more frustrated. And you get more desperate. And you wonder why you're still where you started. But the reason is obvious. You're where you started because you haven't done anything different. You've consumed inspiring content, but you haven't acted on it. You've had insights, but you haven't implemented them. You've seen your destructive patterns, but you haven't changed them. You've admitted what you need to release, but you haven't released anything. You've identified what you need to do differently, but you keep doing everything the same. And so, predictably, everything stays the same. Marcus Aurelius wrote something you need to brand into your mind with fire. Knowledge without action is entertainment. Inspiration without implementation is just temporary emotion. Insight without behavior change is intellectual masturbation. And all of them leave you exactly where you were, only now with the illusion that you did something when you actually did nothing. And that's your pattern. You consume, you get inspired, you have insights, you feel temporarily motivated, and then you go back to exactly the same. Because you never translate anything into concrete action. You never really implement anything. You never change current behavior. You just add knowledge to your mental collection without using it to transform anything real. And you call that growth, when really it's just accumulation of information without life transformation. Epictetus was brutally direct about this with his students. Don't tell me what you learned. Show me what you changed. Don't tell me what you understood. Show me what you did differently. Don't tell me what insights you had. Show me what behaviors you transformed. Because if nothing changed in how you live, nothing you learned mattered. It was just entertainment disguised as education. And your final hours in this episode can be exactly that. Entertainment, another piece of content consumed, another dose of inspiration that evaporates tomorrow. Another moment where you felt good temporarily, but that changes nothing permanently. Or they can be the beginning of real transformation. The moment where you finally stop consuming passively and start building actively. The point where you admit the emptiness doesn't fill itself and start filling it with conscious action. And here's the most painful part. You haven't just failed to act. You've used content consumption as a substitute for action. You've convinced yourself that reading another book is progress. That listening to another podcast is growth. That having another insight is transformation. But it's not. It's sophisticated procrastination. It's a way to feel like you're doing something without having to do anything that really matters, without having to change anything that really costs. Because real change costs deeply. It requires discomfort. It requires risk. It requires the possibility of failure. It requires releasing comfortable things. It requires facing fears. It requires doing things you've never done before. And all of that is scary. So you consume content instead. And you feel productive. You feel like you're working on yourself. But you're not. You're avoiding the real work by consuming content about the work. Seneca practiced what he called immediate implementation. Every time he had an insight, every time he learned something, every time he saw a pattern he needed to change, he gave himself 24 hours maximum to implement something concrete. He didn't wait for the perfect moment. He didn't plan extensively. He didn't prepare infinitely. He just acted. Imperfectly. But he acted because he understood that the gap between learning and doing is where all transformations die, and the longer the gap, the less likely you'll ever cross it. And you have to close that gap now. Not tomorrow, not next week, now. Because if you finish this episode without acting immediately, the probability that you'll ever act drops to almost zero. Tomorrow you'll have the same excuses as always, the same reasons to postpone, the same inertia pulling you back to the familiar, and everything you heard today will join the long list of things you knew you should do, but never did. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his final days something that summarizes everything. I've known men who knew exactly what they needed to do to live well, who perfectly understood what they had to change, who saw with total clarity where they were and where they needed to be. And they died without doing any of it, because there was always tomorrow. There was always a reason to wait. There was always something to resolve first. And then they ran out of time. And they left with all that knowledge unused, with all those insights unimplemented, with all that clarity that never translated into action. Don't die like that. Don't waste this moment. So here's your final task, and it's not for later, it's for the next 24 hours. You're going to choose the 3 lessons from this episode that resonated most with you, the 3 that confronted you most, the 3 you need most. And for each one, you're going to define a specific, concrete, measurable action you'll take in the next 24 hours. Not, I'm going to be more intentional. That's not specific. I'm going to sit in silence for 30 minutes tomorrow at 6 in the morning without distractions. That's specific. And you're going to take those 3 actions. Without excuses, without negotiation, without waiting for the perfect moment. You're going to do them. Because that's the difference between consuming another episode and transforming your life. Between being temporarily inspired and changing permanently. Between staying where you are and starting to move toward where you want to be. It all comes down to whether you act in the next 24 hours or let this join the list of things you knew but never did. And be honest with yourself. You know exactly what you need to do. The lessons in this episode didn't tell you anything you didn't already know at some level. They just confronted you with truths you've been avoiding. They just forced you to look at what you've been ignoring. They just gave words to what you already felt. But now you have to decide, are you going to keep avoiding or are you going to start facing? Are you going to keep ignoring or are you going to start acting? Are you going to keep consuming passively or are you going to start building actively? Here's the final capture moment. This moment of emptiness you're going through isn't punishment. It's fertile soil where the person you're meant to be can be born. But the most fertile soil in the world produces nothing if you never plant. And you've been standing on fertile soil, waiting for something to magically grow, cursing the earth for being empty. When the earth is waiting for you to plant something, the emptiness doesn't fill itself. A meaningful life doesn't magically appear. You have to build it. Decision by decision, action by action. Day after day, starting now, in the next 24 hours, with 3 concrete actions that prove something changed. That this time you didn't just consume content. This time you transformed life. Your life, starting now. From lost to found begins with acceptance. You've reached the end of the first episode. 10 lessons that probably made you uncomfortable, that questioned things you took for granted, that confronted you with truths you've been avoiding. And now you're at a decisive moment. You can close this and return to your life exactly the same, with the same excuses, the same justifications, the same promises that tomorrow will be different. Or you can decide that something changes. Now, today, in the next 24 hours. This was the episode about acceptance, about honestly admitting you're lost, that you don't know where you're going, that the life you built isn't the life you want, that you've been pretending to have answers you don't have, that the emptiness you feel is real, that you need to change something fundamental. And that acceptance, though it feels like defeat, is actually your first step towards something better. Because you can't change what you don't admit. You can't fix what you pretend isn't broken. You can't find yourself while you keep pretending you're not lost. The Stoics didn't write to entertain you, they wrote to transform you. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations for you to read and feel temporarily inspired. He wrote them as tools for real transformation, as brutal reminders of how to live when everything in you wants to give up. And this episode wasn't entertainment. It was a call to action. It was confrontation with truth. It was your opportunity to wake up. But waking up requires more than listening. It requires acting. And action has to start in the next 24 hours. Because if you don't act in the next 24 hours, you probably never will. Tomorrow you'll have the same excuses, the same reasons to postpone, the same inertia pulling you back. So the window is now, the next 24 hours. 3 concrete actions. That's the difference between consuming content and transforming life. And if you decide to act, if you decide this time is different, there's something more you need to know. This was just the first episode of 12. Acceptance was just the first step. Because accepting you're lost isn't enough. You also have to face why you're lost. And that brings us to the next episode. The next episode is called The Lie, and it's going to confront you with something more uncomfortable than admitting you're lost. It's going to confront you with all the lies you've been telling yourself, the lies about who you are, what you want, why you do what you do, the lies that keep you trapped. The lies you protect because the truth is too scary, the lies you've spent years cultivating until they became more real than the truth. Because here's what you discovered in this episode. You're lost, but you still don't know why. You still haven't faced the fundamental lies that brought you here. And until you face those lies, until you name them and disarm them, you'll stay lost. You can do everything this episode suggested and still be trapped, because being lost is the symptom. The lies are the disease, and the next episode goes directly to that disease. So, if this episode resonated with you, if you recognized your life in these words, if that emptiness is real for you, if you're ready to do the real work of finding yourself, the next episode is waiting for you, but only if you act first. Only if you implement something from this episode in the next 24 hours. Because if you can't act on what you already know, you're not ready to face deeper truths. If you can't make small changes now, you're not prepared for the big changes coming. The Stoics believed that real transformation is sequential. You can't skip steps. You can't go straight to freedom without passing through honesty. You can't build an authentic life on comfortable lies. So this episode was your foundation, your moment to admit the truth, your acceptance of being lost, and only from that honest acceptance can you begin the work of finding yourself. But that work requires you to stop lying to yourself, to face the truths you've been avoiding, to disarm the illusions you've been protecting, and that's what's coming. That's what the next episode will do, but only if you're ready, only if you prove you can act, only if you demonstrate this time is different. So here's your final moment of decision. 3 actions in 24 hours. That's your test. That's your demonstration that something changed. That's your evidence you're ready for what's coming. And if you take those 3 actions, if you really do them, then the next episode is waiting for you, with harder truths, with deeper confrontations, with the real work of dismantling the lies that keep you trapped. But if you do nothing, if you let this be another episode consumed without action, if you return to your life exactly the same, then you're not ready, and that's okay. But be honest about it. Don't pretend you want to change while doing everything possible to change nothing. Don't say you're searching for your purpose while avoiding every opportunity to discover it. Don't proclaim you want to find yourself while continuing to run from yourself. The choice is yours, as it always was, as it always will be. No one can live your life for you. No one can do the work for you. No one can transform you except you. And that work starts now, in the next 24 hours, with 3 actions that prove you finally stopped consuming and started building. That you stopped waiting and started acting. That you stopped being passively lost and started actively finding yourself. Lost isn't destroyed. It's just the beginning, but only if you accept being lost, only if you stop pretending, only if you start acting, and that beginning is now, not tomorrow, now. What are you going to do in the next 24 hours that proves something changed? Answer that question. Act on your answer, and then you'll be ready for what's coming, to face the lies, to disarm the illusions, to build a life with real foundation for the first time. The next episode is waiting for you, but only if you prove you're ready. 3 actions, 24 hours, and then we continue toward truth, toward brutal honesty, toward the life you really want to live. I'll see you there. If you decide to show up, if you decide to act, if you decide that this time, finally, is different. Your voice matters here more than you think. Every insight you share strengthens and elevates this community, because this isn't just another space. It's a circle of people who choose to live with intention, with discipline, and with character. Each of you leaves a mark, and the reflection that receives the most support will be pinned as a banner of who we are. Not as decoration, but as a reminder of the kind of warrior who chooses to think, feel, and act with Stoic clarity. Because this is a community that doesn't run from pain, it walks through it with courage. A community that doesn't look for cheap comfort, it seeks wisdom. A community that doesn't break under adversity, it turns it into strength. And if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is already shifting. Something is waking up. Something is asking for more. So, before you leave, check the description. There you'll find the paths we created to help you keep strengthening your mind. They're not there by accident. Each one exists to help you go deeper, build inner resilience, and return again and again to that place within you where nothing and no one can take your peace. Subscribing isn't doing the podcast a favor. It's an act of respect toward yourself. It's choosing not to live on autopilot anymore. It's committing to think differently, to feel with more order, to live with more intention. Because every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we publish reflections designed to stay with you when life gets heavy, when your mind gets loud, when you need a reminder of who you are. Not following us means risking missing the one lesson you might need in the hardest moment. And if you choose to go a step further, if you choose to become a member, understand one thing clearly. You're not donating, you're sustaining a mission. Because of you, this flame stays alive. Because of you, we can keep spreading Stoicism as a refuge for millions who are fighting not to give up. Your support is what keeps this podcast alive, strong, and growing. You're not a spectator, you're part of the foundation holding this community together. I'll see you in our next Stoicism for Winners session, where we'll keep exploring the depth of Stoic wisdom applied to everyday life. In the meantime, dive into the recommended sessions in the description and continue your path. And until we cross paths again, don't forget this. You are the master of your perception, the guardian of your peace, and the warrior of your own battle. That is the legacy of Stoicism. That is the art of becoming invincible.